This is now the presentation number 5 in this series of presentations about decolonizing social thought. And after the previous one, number 4, discussed Eurocentrism as a critique of politics, this presentation now is about the critique of Eurocentric theories. As you certainly all know, critiquing theories as being Eurocentric is something people do and share across the whole world. It is considered as the most critical way of reflecting on theories. It is shared among all people. You find it anywhere in any publication. Everybody uses this notion of Eurocentrism, and rarely the question is raised what it means. There seemed to be a common understanding what this means. I looked at it and it only creates irritations. What is it saying? Eurocentrism critiques theories which are created in Europe about any social phenomena in Europe. Which means that this critique of Eurocentrism is also a critique that is applied across the whole social sciences, across all disciplines. Eurocentrism, the critique of Eurocentrism, you find anywhere in all the theory creations in all disciplines. So again, what does it say? Theories created in Europe about phenomena in Europe are theories which are valid theories. They are okay, but the critique is you cannot, now the verb is quite tricky, you cannot use them, apply them. They are not appropriate for theorizing beyond Europe. It has to be stressed that this is a critique of theories which, strangely, certifies, confirms what they are saying. The critique of Eurocentrism is in fact saying that these theories are okay as long as they explain anything in Europe, as long as they explain any theories theorizing about any phenomena in Europe. Beyond, they don't work. So it is a critique that doesn't critique the content of the theory, but it critiques, or more precisely, it rejects this theory without criticizing the arguments. It rejects the theory as not applicable to other societies beyond Europe. That is their nature as a Eurocentric theory. A theory which has a validity as a theory. It is a true theory, a correct theory, but is only correct in Europe. And this is what everybody finds not irritating. I do. Why does it irritate me? My first question is, if this theory, which is confirmed to be a theory that explains something in Europe, can, though not explain anything beyond Europe, how is this possible? One has to take for granted that the critique that a theory which explains something in Europe but not beyond Europe is a theory about the same thing. Otherwise, it would be absurd. If you say there is a theory that explains unemployment, is telling something about cows, is telling about something about families, whatever. And if you then say, but this theory cannot be applied to the same phenomena if they are somewhere else, that's very strange. Because if it means that the things this theory is about are not the same as the things in Europe, then it is very odd to accuse a theory that it doesn't explain something it is not about, because the thing I'm talking about here now is something else. So, if this theory does not want to explain this absurd argument that a theory about A is not an appropriate theory about B, a theory I made about a cow is not a theory about a cat. That's too absurd to assume that this is what the critique of Eurocentrism wants to say. In other words, one has to take for granted that the critique of the theory, the rejection of the theory of allowing to understand anything this theory understands in a certain place in Europe, but doesn't allow to understand this somewhere else beyond Europe, it must be about the same thing. But that makes it even more crazy. How is that possible? You create a theory about unemployment. Let's say you create a theory about what is a citizen. Let's say a citizen is a human that pursues its life interests, and in capitalist society, the only way to do that is to earn money. Okay, this is a short theory. Now, this theory could not be applied to anybody beyond Europe? Strange. Moreover, if you say a theory is not applicable to a topic, an object of thinking beyond Europe, How else can you say that without having your own theory about this thing? If you say a theory about any object here, beyond Europe, let's say in Egypt, because the author I will quote soon is talking about what he calls the Arab societies. So if you have something you theorize about in Egypt, and you say, I cannot theorize about it with the theories provided from Europe, again, about the same thing, otherwise it's ridiculous, then this requires that you have to have a theory about that thing. Otherwise you cannot say the other theory is not appropriate to explain that. And that makes it even more strange. So if you already have to have a theory in order to be able to reject another theory as being able to explain this thing, why do you at all talk about this other theory? You have already one. So why do you reject another one? For what? So, this critique, to me, does not make sense at all. I will now show you a quotation from a scholar from I think he's from, I don't know where he's from. He's a scholar from anywhere in the Arab world. And he presents us his thought about how to create non-Eurocentric theories. So, since I don't know any more professional way, I read this now to you. I hope you can read it. Sociology is most commonly classified in the West into two trends, depending on the starting point: the individual or society, the partial or the whole. This classification is confusing to many Arab researchers who have not found mature European individualism in their societies or coherent nations made up of Western-like stratified societies from which they can start their research. Maybe that is what Arab sociologists believe Western sociology is not suitable. Sorry, that is why Arab sociologists believe Western sociology is not suitable for their societies and resort to the Arab Islamic heritage to come up with a local sociology. Ali Al-Wadi's work is an example that we will later discuss in detail. A new Arab proposal in this regard is gaining prominence. It calls for new classification of sociology into two trends: balance and conflict. This quotation, before going into all other details, reveals the oddities about a theory that is a theory here but not there, a theory in Europe, but a theory that cannot be used, applied to understand, in this quotation, the societies in the Arab world. The secret is that there is a way of theorizing in this critique of Eurocentrism that talks about theories not as a theory about the thing it theorizes about, but it talks about the theory as a means for theorizing. So what it is saying is, theories created in Europe are theories for theorizing about phenomena in Europe, but are theories which are not appropriate for theorizing about phenomena in the Arab world. However, this does not make this confusion any better, rather it makes it worse. Why? Because this means, firstly, theorizing means you have to have a theory through which you think about the thing you want to think about. Actually, this is, if you are not a professional thinker, you might find it odd. If you are a professional thinker, an academic educated in the academic system of our capitalist societies, you would say, that's how it is. That's how I was told how it works to create a theory. How does it work? It works exactly in this way. In order to think about anything, you have to have a theory through which you create your theory. This is what disciplinary thinking is doing by providing with the body of theories of a discipline the theories you apply to your creation of thinking, of thought. Now, if you say within this way of theorizing, if you say, but the theory body a discipline provides, and that contains theories created in Europe, I cannot use these theories for theorizing about anything else beyond Europe. And that makes it even more absurd. Why? Firstly, the critique of Eurocentrism is a critique of the theories created about European phenomena. Now, sorry, are you joking? Somebody who created a theory in Europe, and you accuse him that this theory doesn't work as a theory through which you approach, that is, by the way, the word you use. If you want to theorize, you need an approach. And an approach is something through which you approach your object of thinking. So if you now say, I want to do a theory about anything in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, wherever, in this Arab world, and you tell the European, your theory is not appropriate to provide my approach for theorizing about anything here. Sorry, was it not the Arab thinker who took the theory in order to theorize through this theory about the Arab world? Or was it the European? It doesn't matter so much, but at least I would like to also mention this, that there is a type of hypocrisy in here, because the only one who certainly does this, using theories from anywhere else to use this as an approach beyond where the theory is produced, normally this is not the European researcher, already because normally the European researchers don't speak the language. So it is in this case the Arab itself who uses a theory created in Europe and then says, but it's bad, it doesn't work here. So whom do you accuse? The European who created the theory, or yourself who used that theory in order to say it doesn't work here? But this is only a kind of little, let's say, a kind of little bit joke. But it is, of course, not a joke. What makes it more confusing is that if you have to have a theory before theorizing, then again, we are back into the old circle. How can you decide if the theory that you apply, the theory through which you approach your object of thinking, is a theory through which this object of thinking could be approached? In other words, do you already have a theory about the thing? And if this is the case, if you must have a theory to reject another theory as being not appropriate for theorizing, then why do you at all still talk about these European theories? Create your theories about anything in the Arab world and don't talk about the European theories. Create your theories, and if you want, you can afterwards, after you have created your theories about anything in the Arab world, you can create a theory, and again, given that it is the same thing, then it would be interesting, after you created your theories, to read a book about a theory about the same thing in Europe or anywhere else, and to see what they share or where they are different. And then you discuss with your colleague in Europe, or vice versa, what you find out about the phenomena you were thinking about. That would be a decent way of theorizing. But something is wrong here in this critique of Eurocentrism. Again, because to make this rejection of the theory that exists, you have to have a theory for theorizing, and then it would be absolutely superfluous to accuse a theory. I cannot use you for theorizing here. Anyway, this is what the critique of Eurocentrism does. Now, this is all based, this kind of argument, this way of arguing, is based on this very particular approach of theorizing, that you need an approach approach through which you create theories. And as I explained, this is what happens in that disciplinary way of theorizing. In the disciplinary way of theorizing, you have to have this approach, which means you have to have a view on the thing about, you have to have a view on the thing or about the thing, I don't know. You want to think about before you think about it, and not only you have to have a view about the thing before thinking about it in order to think about it. This view is the view through which you create your theory about the thing. Again, there must be a view about the thing in order to create a theory about the thing. My conclusion is, this is, by its nature, thinking through presuppositions. The theory through which you approach your object of thinking is a presupposition, a view you made up before thinking, for thinking about the thing. Conclusion: this cannot be a theory about the thing, because if you had a theory, you don't have to think about it anymore. So the presupposition through which you theorize must be a pre-scientific or a pre-view that is not a result from thinking about it. Or, to put it more precisely, it is not a result of reflecting on this thing. It is any kind of assumption you make beforehand. In the disciplinary creation of knowledge, this thinking through presuppositions, which necessarily are assumptions about the things. Scientifically, you call that an hypothesis. In disciplinary thinking, this assumption is somehow hidden as a pure assumption by the fact that you do this with already existing theories. So it seems as if this thinking through already existing theories is not assumptions which exist before thinking. But this is a lie. Because, as you know, the theory through which you approach any object of thinking is a choice. You can choose. You can choose any theory and look at the thing you want to theorize about through this theory. And whatever you want to choose, you can choose it. Firstly, you choose a disciplinary approach. You can think about anything through a psychological perspective, a sociological, an economical, etc., etc. And then within the bodies of theories, you can choose a theory which says A is an animal, or B says no, it's a human. Any kind of thing that any theory says is an appropriate means to approach your object of research. So it is also in disciplinary thinking, in ordinary disciplinary thinking, it is an assumption before thinking through which you think. Needless to say, but I don't want to elaborate on this point, this results in imaginary interpretations about the thing if you create them through an imagination about the thing you had before thinking and through which you create your thought. I don't want to continue this here. This is another point I will discuss in another presentation series about the nature of this disciplinary social science theorizing. Let's now come back to Eurocentrism. Eurocentrism uses and practices, in fact, this way of theorizing. Theorizing through such kind of presuppositions. And now, the remarkable thing is, the notion of Eurocentrism, the critique of a Eurocentric view, is very much telling about how you create your presuppositions through which you create your theories, your non-Eurocentric theories. What does the notion of Eurocentrism tell us about this presupposed thinking? It says, you must think through presuppositions which are constructed through political entities. The Europeans create their theories through a perspective they have as a European. In other words, what they are saying is, what this critique of Eurocentrism is saying, non-Eurocentric theorizing must create any theory through the political entity it belongs to. Number one, I'm talking about how the critique of Eurocentrism changes the way of theorizing, changes the disciplinary way of thinking to something new. I should add maybe at this point, though I don't want to also elaborate on this, disciplinary thinking, that is the very European approach. European not in the sense of how it's used in Eurocentric thinking, in the critique of Eurocentric thinking. European in the sense of the historical development of thinking about the social. The social sciences, the plurality of social sciences, the creation of theories through disciplinary knowledge bodies. This is the very historical form of social thought. Nobody else but, in fact, the very European capitalist societies have created from their critique of the classical philosophies. In other words, what I want to say is, Eurocentrism that rejects this disciplinary way of thinking, by doing that, adjusts thinking Firstly, through this way of thinking that creates theories through presuppositions. So this critique is based on accepting and adjusting, theorizing across the world to this very European approach of creating theories. Even more, by critiquing this disciplinary way of theorizing and suggesting an alternative way to construct the prepositions of this way of theorizing, it, call it discreetly or not, takes for granted that this is the most natural way of theorizing. It is not. If you just have a quick look at the Soviet Union as an example, there was no sociology. And you may think about that whatever you want. I'm just saying that in order to say disciplinary thinking is not the natural way of thinking. It is the way of thinking of the capitalist societies. And the critique of Eurocentrism takes this way of thinking as the basis of their critique. And by taking this as the basis of their critique, of how these presuppositions are constructed, it has already, without mentioning it, spread this way of thinking across the world. More precisely, across those parts of the world in which this disciplinary thinking so far was not considered as the natural way of thinking at all. Again, I don't want to elaborate too much on this, but the theories created beyond Europe in the former colonized world was even considered by the Europeans as unscientific. And it was considered as being unscientific because it didn't do what they do. It didn't create their theories through these disciplinary theory bodies. This is all wiped away. The opposition between disciplinary thinking of the capitalist societies and the way of thinking, not to mention the theories created in this part of the world, are all wiped away by taking for granted that this is now the way theorizing has to be practiced across the world. This is important because Eurocentrism appears as such a critical development of theorizing. It is the way to decolonize thinking. But in its substance, this decolonization of thinking is the application of the way thinking works in capitalist societies. And this is not irrelevant to mention, because it means that this way of thinking through disciplines is the way exactly those societies created and still create their theories, which were the former colonizers and which, by the way, are the contemporary imperialists continuing with their politics and their economy, the exploitation of the now no longer colonies. But again, This is also not what I want to elaborate on. I just have to say the critique of Eurocentrism operates with the very way of thinking which it, in its notion of Eurocentric views, its critique of Eurocentric views, opposes. But it doesn't oppose this way of theorizing. What it opposes is the way this way of theorizing constructs its presuppositions. And as I already said, calling a particular way of creating theories Eurocentric attaches to theories whatever they say, disregarding what they say. They don't care about it. They say, we don't care. They are okay in Europe. Let's not be bothered about that. We don't even have to look at that. For us, they are theories created in Europe, and that's enough. And our critique is just, don't bother us with your theories. You are fine. We have no problem with your theories at all. Just don't apply them here. And as I already said, the only people who are really applying that here are these guys themselves. This one I just quoted, for example. And they are applying them not only with regard to this some kind of fundamental ways of thinking, what I described as the thinking through the presuppositions of disciplinary knowledge bodies, but they apply this way of thinking even with regard to the content of the theories. I will come back to this point later. I just want to say something more about their critique and how it affects and how it wants to affect the construction of the presuppositions. Characterizing a theory as a European theory introduces into this thinking through approaches a way of thinking that approaches things through politically constructed presuppositions. In Eurocentric thinking, in a way of thinking that characterizes theories via their belonging to a political body, Europe, or in our quotation, alternatively, the Arab societies, constructs presuppositions as a kind of impact of the political body in which they are created. In this non-Eurocentric way of thinking, all the subjects about which social sciences theorize, the humans populating our world, are all constructed as nothing else but representatives of these political entities, abstracted from what these people really are: peasants, farmers, taxi drivers, doctors, nurses. For Eurocentric thinking, they are all representations of the Arab. In other words, overcoming this disciplinary way of constructing the presuppositions through which they think and replacing them or I should better say, elaborating them, because they don't also abolish their disciplines, right? They just add or further develop this disciplinary thinking with a way to construct these presuppositions. And the way they further develop this is to construct these presuppositions through these political entities. This is if you consider that this is also a way of subsuming all the subjects about which social sciences theorize, the people, the humans, living in these political entities. This means they are all made representatives of these political entities. Quickly in brackets, a word about these political entities. And this is quite telling. And it's not funny. The European, and the Arab are these not entities of nation states? In the case of Europe, at least it applies to most of the nation states in Europe, an alliance of nation states that created this alliance in order to play a more powerful role on the world as they could as individual states. So are these political entities and their political agendas being powerful, more powerful as an alliance of nation states than they could be as individual nation states? This is what constitutes theorizing. This imperial entity, that is how social sciences must think through this view. But this is exactly what these critique requests. You look at your things in Europe through your European perspective. We look through it through our Arab perspective. And in the Arab case, there is not such an alliance. That is, however, obviously the dream of people who are arguing for non-Eurocentric thinking, that there should be also such a powerful alliance across all the individual states. And this is all I want to say about it. Just to say how much a dream of being a strong global political imperialist player via a network, association, alliance or whatever of countries. This is apparently what at least this Arab colleague must have in mind if he says we need a theory that allows us to understand the Arab world. And this is a little bit hypocrisy, because what he really wants to say is we need a powerful theory for the Arab world. Now, a few more remarks about this political construction of the presuppositions for thinking that is advocated by non-Eurocentric thinking. Thinking through these political entities